Welcome to a bonus episode of the Blooms and Barnacles podcast, where today we're not talking about everything related to Ulysses.
Yeah, it sucks.
Ulysses?
No, just kidding.
Okay, I was going to say it's a pretty hot take this many years in, but you gave it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
What are we talking about today, Dermot?
Oh, short stories from Dubliners.
You can say the word. You don't have to whisper it.
No, Dubliners, which is actually written in a language that normal people can understand.
I think that's definitely I think people's impression of Dubliners is it's more readable. But I think once you get into it, there's plenty of complexity there as well.
You can see it's the same voice, right? Like you can tell this is the same author.
So I thought, what can we do in our second year now of Patreon? And one of the ideas I had was to do a series on Dubliners. Our very first episode we did last year was about the dead, specifically.
Yep.
And so we thought, why not go ahead and do the rest of it? So that's what we're going to do over the next few months. We're starting out with the first two stories, which are...
Sisters.
Yeah.
And Encounter.
Yes.
Hey, see, I remembered.
Yeah, of course you did. And Dermot read them ahead of time. So something we do for our Patreon listeners is Dermot reads the story ahead of time. Which is fine. I like that you come in fresh to the Ulysses material.
We deliberately don't do that with Ulysses so that it's a fresh take. Yeah.
We'll just do a quick discussion of each story. We'll give a little, if you've never read the stories, take an hour and read them, I'd say. And not even that if you read fast. And come back. Pause it is this exact point, come back. Let's give a short synopsis of each story before we begin, and then just give our thoughts on it, some things we noticed, and our feelings. I'll talk about some things we read, and all my sources, as always, will be on the Patreon post right underneath the audio or video version of this. So check those out if you want to read more, because just like with the dead, we will scratch the surface of this. People have written hundreds of pages about each of these stories, not to mention the rest of Dubliners. So we won't be as thorough as we usually are with Ulysses, but there's only so many hours in a month to do everything we need to do. So the stories are short. Discussion will be short as well. All right, so we'll start with the sisters. Dermot? Would you feel comfortable giving a synopsis of the sisters?
Well, a priest has died.
Father Flynn.
And it's sort of centered around a young boy who was very close to the priest. And the boy's uncle and an old friend of the family.
I think it's pronounced Cotter.
Mr. Cooter, is giving his impressions. And he's insinuating that something's not right. That it's unwholesome for the boy to be this close to a priest, and he's circling around what it might be, and it's very vague language. And he said it can make a bad impression. Some of these ideas on the boy, like it's a priest. Like if you accept the best possible case scenario of a priest, say before we all kind of clued into stuff in the last few decades, how bad it was. What's he getting at? What exactly is he getting at? So it's peculiar. Yeah, and the priest has had some sort of a stroke or a seizure or a psychological break, and he's not stable. He's like laughing hysterically, which doesn't sound like a stroke to me. It sounds more like a mental break. As when you have a stroke. I've met people who've had strokes. They don't like loud noise. They, like I had one co-worker who'd had a stroke, and we had met in a coffee shop. He said, "You mind if we go outside? Ever since the stroke, I can't handle this clang." Your ears become like really sensitive to that. It doesn't sound like a stroke. It sounds like something else to me, depending on how accurate Joyce was being about the medical condition. Hysterical laughter almost is strange. Like something's kind of clawing at him. Given the time we live in, it's very hard to look at that and not draw certain conclusions about an unhealthy relationship between a priest and a young man.
Yes, and there's a scene towards the end where they are having I'm not sure if it's his wake or it's just a gathering, after his death, and the titular sisters. So it's interesting to me the title is not The Priest or The Boy. It's the sisters, and they're kind of talking in a similar truncated fashion about Father Flynn's life. Why do you think they call the story The Sisters and not The Priest?
Yeah, I don't know.
I've given that some thought, and I think it's because this is an idea I took from an article, but do you remember what the sisters' line of work was?
Oh, I forget now.
They work in a draper's that's just called Drapers. Like, it doesn't have a name. So there's kind of a nondescriptness to it. And the priest, I think, he would meet the boy at the back of the drapers. But one of the services they offered was umbrella recovering. So what does an umbrella do?
Well, it keeps the rain off. Yeah.
It protects you from the harsher elements.
Yes.
That's kind of the sisters' then metaphorical, position in the story is this umbrella function. Mm-hmm. But who are they protecting?
Oh, the priest, their brother.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's this little line of dialogue here. They said, it was that chalice he broke. And then ... Mm-hmm. That was the beginning of it. Of course, they say it was all right, but that it contained nothing. But still, they say it was the boy's fault. But poor James was so nervous. God be merciful to him. And what was it? Said my aunt. I heard something. And they kind of like dance around this. The very last line of the story was, there was something gone wrong with him. Mm-hmm. And then, again, that ellipsis. I'm sure you're familiar with ellipsis as a punctuation term. Mm-hmm. If you see an ellipsis in writing, what does it mean?
Yeah, you're cropping out words. Mm-hmm. You're skipping a part. You're quoting somebody. I don't need to quote these two sentences. Mm-hmm. They're not applicable. Take them out. Yeah,
there's something that's not being said. There's something that's being left out. And in the same way, are you familiar with ellipsis as a literary term? Mm-mm. It's a similar idea. It's that you're conveying ideas in a very minimalistic way. You're leaving out some key details that can be inferred from the context of the story. Mm-hmm. And I would say, in addition to Joyce, both of the short stories we read for today, another author from the same era, Ernest Hemingway, is very famous for using this in his stories to the point where it's sometimes referred to as Hemingway's iceberg, mm-hmm. where the idea is that you get a little information, but the real information is this huge iceberg beneath the surface. Mm. And so The Sisters is definitely has that quality to it. The question then for readers is, what is not being said? Yeah, there was the scene with old Cotter talking to his uncle as well. Yeah, it's so interesting because you'd think that they'd be happy that the young man has taken an interest in the clergy and all in the religion. Mm-hmm. And old Cotter says, I have my own theory about it. He said, I think it was one of those peculiar cases, but it's hard to say. Peculiar cases really stands out. And old Cotter says, well, what I mean is it's bad for children. My idea is let a young lad run about and play with young lads of his own age and not be, am I right, Jack? And not be what? Mm-hmm. There's some deliberate holes in there. And that's where the fun of a literary analysis steps in, is what do they mean? I read analysis of this story from several different decades. I find, especially with like mid-century or older analyses, they really focus on the idea of faith, of the priest is clearly a miserable old man. He's not happy with his vocation, and he's now attempting to pass on this vocation to this young boy, and by extension pass on a similar unhappiness and dissatisfaction with life. But I find once you get to more recent commentaries from the last few decades, it really takes a different tack. And I think that's the one both you and I came away with it from, which is that this priest is grooming this young boy. I think that we're all very aware of the rampant sex abuse within the Catholic Church. It's hard to not see this as a that kind of story. That I'm going to immediately retract what I just said. It's never on the page whether or not the priest actually did anything to the narrator, but it seems known in the community that there's something wrong with him. Yep. And I've definitely see like that he drops the chalice. Like I would say more Catholic oriented interpretation of that is like, well, he dropped the vessel that holds the body of Christ. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or the blood of Christ, and that's a transgression. Then there's a scene of the other, I think it's Father O'Rourke, finds him laughing alone in the confessional. What did you think about that image?
Yeah, it sounds like a mental breakdown of some kind.
He has a sin that he cannot atone for. Yeah.